20 minutes before departure, Corso phoned Amilcar Pinto to tell him that Fargus's torment as a book collector was over, and that the plan was cancelled. Pinto would still be paid the sum agreed for his trouble. Chapter 9 of the Club Dumas is where Corso arrives in Paris to first authenticate the Anjou wine with a scholar and historian, Achille Replinger. Replinger is to the Anjou wine what the Sinisa brothers are to the Book of the Nine Gates. When Corso shows the manuscript, Replinger immediately offers to purchase it at first sight. Of course, Corso declines. Replinger does vouch for the Anjou wine as authentic. They discuss together the manuscript's history and the significance of the blue paper with its collaborator, Auguste Maquet. By now, the reader should start to take notice how often Maquet is shoehorned into a novel named after Dumas. Here's a shortened excerpt from the book that discusses the history between Maquet and Dumas as told by Replinger. Dumas drew up a plan for each novel and discussed it with his collaborator, who then did the research and made an outline of the story, or a first draft. These were the white pages. Then Dumas would rewrite it on the blue paper. He worked in his shirt sleeves. He didn't drink coffee or spirits while writing, only seltzer water. Also, he rarely smoked. He wrote page after page under pressure from his publishers, who were always demanding more. No other writer has known such glory in his lifetime. Dumas rose from nothing to have it all, as if he'd made a pact with God. Yes, said Corso, or with the devil. Corso meets up with the girl Irene Adler at a bookstore. She gives Corso a gift, a book, The Devil in Love, by Jacques Cazot, the 1878 edition. Corso reads a page from the book at random. Man emerged from a handful of earth and water. Why should a woman not be made of dew, earthly vapors, and rays of light, of the condensed residues of a rainbow? Where does the possible lie, and where the impossible? The girl explains to Corso the meaning of the passage. I know what I was told a long time ago. The rainbow is the bridge between heaven and earth. It will shatter at the end of the world, once the devil has crossed it on horseback. I heard it told to a friend, Bileto. As she said the name, she stopped a moment and frowned tenderly, like a little girl revealing a secret. Who is Bileto? According to Google AI, this character never existed in the Club Dumas, even though it's directly taken from the book. Because the novel was translated into English, it may be a play on Beleth or Belial. And even if not, Beleth is a king of hell who has 85 legions of demons under his command. He rides a pale horse, and a variety of music is heard before him, according to most authors on demonology and the most known grimoires. Belial is a name with several origins, representing wickedness and rebellion, the personification of evil, to the king of hell. John Milton's Paradise Lost describes him as a seductive, vile demon of impurity. He's also a character from one of my favorite video games. If we're comparing this chapter of the book to the film, all they have in common is the air flight Corso and the girl share. The girl shows not to care about Fargus, but reminds Corso she's his guardian angel. Unlike the book, their journey together ends at French immigration. The girl simply disappears. I sort of like this approach, because it makes her more mysterious, perhaps ethereal, because we don't know if her disappearance is literal or metaphoric. Maybe she can just vanish. Conveniently sidestepped was the question of how she would get into a country, let alone board an international flight. Does she have a passport? Spoiler alert, yes. We do learn from the book that it was Irene who paid for both tickets. Since the rest of the chapter is devoted to the Anjou wine plot thread, it's entirely dropped from the ninth gate. However, there is a line of dialogue from the chapter where the girl asks Corso if he believes in the devil. According to the script, the girl was to ask the question in Corso's Paris hotel room after their encounter with the mustache man. Of course, this didn't happen. Instead, the next closest line was delivered by Balkan with a very different reply.
Are you a religious man, Mr. Corso? I mean, do you believe in the supernatural?
I believe in my percentage.
The only other bit of trivia that would have survived was The Devil in Love, that I mentioned previously. That's the book the girl was reading in the lounge according to a draft of the script, but changed in the film. Back to the chapter, that ends in a surprise. After Corso reminisces about his old flame, Nikon, he notices a taxi passing by in an intersection. In the back seat, two passengers having a heated conversation. It was Bernie and Liana Telfer. The 10th chapter is where the book introduces Gruber. You'll know him from the film as the hotel concierge and Corso's information mercenary for hire. The book describes Gruber was dry and imperturbable, with a crew cut and a permanent poker player's expression around the mouth. With Gruber's introduction, Corso asks two favors of him. The first, find where Bernie and Liana Telfer are staying. The second, tell Corso what Gruber knows about the girl. While one will take several hours, Gruber immediately answers who the girl is. Irene Adler, he read. British passport. Issued 2 months ago. 19 years old. Address 223B, Baker Street, London. 221B was where the fictional Sherlock Holmes lived. The film introduces Gruber in a very brief scene where we learn that Corso doesn't have a reservation, and it is greatly implied that the two are familiar with one another. Corso makes a routine of greasing Gruber's palm. Corso always gave tips or bribes with a shrug, as if to say, I'll do the same for you sometime. It made it such a friendly conspiratorial exchange, it was difficult to tell who was doing whom a favor. In the 9th gate, Dean Corso will ask Gruber for help finding Liana Telfer and her bodyguard.
I need a favor, Gruber.
Certainly, Mr. Corso.
While the film depicts Gruber's appearance as imagined from the book, the Club Dumas gives him a backstory. During the retreat of 1944, when he was 16 years old and a Croat volunteer in the Horst Wessel 18th Panzer Grenadier Division, a Russian bullet hit him in the spine. It left him with an Iron Cross second class and 3 fused vertebrae for life. Described as an old SS Waffen, Gruber's World War II experiences are omitted in the 9th gate. It's not a surprise really, since his personal story was unimportant, but what would you say that he's not the only character in the book, not the only character in this 10th chapter that has a history with World War II Germany? The scene moves to Corso's room, where in the book he had the room reserved. After thinking about Nikon again, and how she once ate the last potato chip, the girl comes to visit him. Corso shares his theory that while the Fargus copy was burned, the engravings were spared. Being relaxed on gin, Corso asks the girl, "Who are you?" The girl answers, "The devil," she said, "the devil in love." When the girl asks who Corso's favorite literary version of the devil is, he answers Milton's Fallen Angel. This is the part of the chapter where we get a clearer picture of who and where the girl is from. Where the film was ambiguous, almost distant, the book makes the lore of heaven versus hell almost an additional plot thread. Pride, freedom, knowledge. Whether at the beginning or at the end, you have to pay for everything. Even for courage, don't you think? And don't you think a lot of courage is needed to face God? To many fans, this was a confession. To a few, a very enthusiastic discussion on classic literature from a student. However, the Club Dumas continues discussing metaphors of the battles between heaven and hell, including a Goya painting and more references from Paradise Lost. It's a very important part of the chapter that steps away from the Anjou wine and the Book of the Nine Gates plot threads. The scene ends with a goodbye and a smile from the girl at the doorway. Corso has a meeting with the Baroness. In the Club Dumas, she is known as Baroness Frieda Ungern, a 70-year-old with 2 sweet little dimples when she smiled. She looked like a French teacher, small and plump, but had her right arm amputated above the elbow. However, we'll call her the Baroness Frieda Kessler, and this Baroness is not wheelchair-ridden. The Baroness lived in a large, expensive apartment with a view of the river and in another time the bonfires of the Inquisition. There were several reading tables occupied by young people who looked like students, and all the walls were covered with books. Her foundation was named after her late husband, the Baron, a much older man. He was a writer of books on magic and witchcraft. The two discussed Torchia and the history of him and his book. Kessler's copy was once owned by the Count of Saint-Germain and Jacques Cazot. The book's history ends in Paris during the Reign of Terror, and Gérard de Nerval, a French travel writer, essayist, and poet, makes a passing reference to the book, writing he had seen it in a friend's house. De Nerval was a friend of Dumas. According to Gerald de Nerval's wiki article, if you choose to believe it, Nerval's father started his medical practice in Saint-Martin, France. Saint-Martin was Liana's family name in the Ninth Gate. Nerval would leave this world Telfer style in January 1855. Gerald de Nerval was a friend of Dumas, but there are no known photographs of them together, as it was not fashionable for the time. When Corso asks the Baroness if she believes in the devil, the Baroness answers with, "Sufficiently to dedicate my life, my collection, this foundation, many years of work, and the 500 pages of my new book all to him." In fact, the Baroness would go on and say, "I saw him once. I was 15 and saw him as clearly as I'm seeing you. He had a hard collar, a hat, and a walking stick. He was very handsome." The chapter ends with the girl calling up Corso from a nearby bar. She describes to him a man waiting outside the foundation. Dark with a mustache and a big scar on his face. He's sitting in a gray BMW across the street. While her character's importance is to provide exposition, Baroness Kessler is a great example of a character that is much like the book, and at the same time much different. For instance, in The Ninth Gate, Kessler speaks some of herself, but spends more time dropping gossip of others. Most everything about her is pieced together. She's German, wealthy enough to live in Paris with a hired staff, and made $1 million in book royalties over 40 years. There's no explanation why she's in the wheelchair, though it hints her body had been slowly corrupted over the years for reasons. Speaking of her wealth, the book shares what pays for Kessler's book collection and how she's paying for her Parisian lifestyle. In some ways, she's a warped reflection of Fargus. Fargus was not a believer, inherited his collection, but sold them off piece by piece to keep what's left of his family's legacy. Kessler, a devout believer, inherited her fortune and sold it off to afford her books. The film depiction of Kessler delivers another line that's pulled from the book.
Why the devil?
I saw him one day. I was 15 years old, and I saw him as plain as I see you now.
What Kessler tells us with Corso's first visit is simple. She knows the gossip between Andrew Telfer and Liana. She tells us about Liana's coven at her chateau, which later we'll learn is adapted from the book, and most of all has no love for Boris Balkan.
Tell your client, who can only be Boris Balkan, to come and examine it himself, if he dares.
The 11th chapter continues Corso's visit with Baroness Kessler, known as Ungern in the book. The Baroness gives her interpretation of each engraving, especially the 9th final one, described by Kessler as the Harlot of Babylon. Kessler confirms the book is a puzzle, meant to be solved and summon the devil to make an appearance. However, she confesses she doesn't know everything about the book, contrary to the film.
I know this work extremely well. I've studied it for years. My knowledge of this book is profound. I wrote a biography of its author.
Corso wants to spend time alone, examining the Baroness's copy of the Nine Gates. The Baroness becomes very offended and objects to Corso's request. Prepared, Corso pulls out a package. He shows Kessler a photograph from a 1943 Berlin publication of a monthly journal of magic and astrology. There, in the picture, a young Freda Kessler stands arm in arm with Heinrich Himmler. Kessler rips the photo from the magazine and leaves Corso alone. While Rochefort waits in his BMW, Corso studies Kessler's copy and reads her notes, translated from the book. Some of its passages are used in the film.
Erase me from the book of life, inscribe me in the black book of death.
Corso just up and leaves the foundation. No drama, no BMW, no Rochefort. He looks for the girl, but she's not around. So Corso hops into a bar and buys a package of cigarettes and a couple glasses of gin. Corso studies his notes, marking the differences between the 3 copies. However, all of the 9th engravings from each copy are the same. He finishes his gin, leaves money on the table, and heads to the Rue Guénégaud. The Rue Guénégaud isn't just a street in Paris. It was where D'Artagnan was confronted. Mysterious figures emerging from the shadows in the 3 Musketeers. It becomes the place where a mysterious figure jumps at Corso. It was Rochefort. Corso stumbles down the stairs when the girl comes to his rescue, so at first he couldn't tell whether the girl was going up or down. He just saw her move incredibly fast, from right to left, her long legs jumping from step to step. She balanced on one leg and, raising the other in a semicircular movement that seemed quite effortless, kicked Rochefort sharply in the face. The chapter comes to a sudden end. Corso's visit in chapters 10 and 11 of the Club Dumas accomplished more than the 9th Gate did in 2. It's a rare example where the book is more efficient than the film. The narrative between the book and film are nearly exact. Corso and Kessler discuss Torquia, his book and her history with the devil, but the Baroness objects to Corso examining her copy without her supervision. Corso finds a clever way to convince her otherwise. When he leaves the Kessler Foundation, he takes a rest in a bar, walks alone in the night, gets jumped by the mustache man before the girl rescues him out of nowhere. However, one big difference lies in how Corso convinces Kessler to let him look at her copy of the book. I've discussed the Baroness in a very early video long before I read the source material, the Club Dumas. In the film, Kessler's Germanic origin makes no difference other than the questions we may have in the back of our minds. After being kicked out, had his struggles with the mustache man, Corso takes a call from Balkan in an undisclosed location. Corso explains why he was kicked out, and getting past her secretary would be near impossible. Balkan suggests,
"Try the lunch break."
Corso shows photocopies of the engravings from Balkan's copy in his unwelcome second visit, and wins the Baroness over. Kessler becomes the trope known as the cool old lady. The script had different plans, however. It goes like this. After being kicked out, Balkan meets Corso in person in a cafe. The conversation they have over coffee is nearly identical said over the phone. And here's where Balkan's suggestion to get past the problem differs. Balkan hands Corso a manila envelope. Inside was the photograph to shame Kessler into giving what Balkan wants. Now the link to Kessler's past is clear. While I prefer the script version over the book, I prefer the final cut of the film over the earlier draft of the screenplay. The book made it all premeditated. Corso pulls out a trump card he had hidden up his sleeve the entire time. It wasn't much of a twist. The payoff wasn't there, and her initial objections weren't very dramatic to begin with. The screenplay was an improvement, since it leverages the animosity between Balkan and Kessler. That's even hinted very early in the film. The 9th Gate decided to go with Corso's power of persuasion rather than being cutthroat holding past images over his victims' heads. He would have done well with social media. Besides, Kessler's World War II past wasn't necessary to dig into. It didn't add anything to an already established field of characters and motivations. I can kinda see wanting to give a backstory to the Baroness, but sometimes less is more. There is one other minor change from the book that the film makes its own. There are passages in the book referencing smoking in the Foundation. In the film, and mentioned in the screenplay, the Baroness does not allow smoking in her library. It's a fire hazard, you know.
My permission did not extend to that, Mr. Corso.
Corso sat on the bottom step, attempting to light a cigarette. Still too stunned, he hadn't recovered his spatial sense. Also, one of the lenses in his glasses was cracked, and he had to squint with one eye to see with the other. The girl, who had been collecting the contents of the bag strewn over the ground, came and handed the bag to him. Chapter 12 begins right after Rochefort is chased off by the girl. who has a bloody nose from bumping heads with the mustache man. The girl tells Corso, "I once wrestled with an angel. He won, but I learned a few things." They both return to the hotel, where Gruber hands Corso a sealed envelope and 2 hotel keys. Corso takes the girl into her hotel room, where he shares his observation that he feels he's a character in a fictional book. The girl's nose continues to bleed, and she refuses his handkerchief. She touched his face and drew 4 red lines with her fingers, from his forehead to his chin. Instead of moving her hand away after this singular caress, she kept it there, damp and warm, while he felt drops of blood running down the 4 lines on his face. This short segment from the book is nearly recreated in the film. The book doesn't mention where Rochefort retreated to, while the film has him jumping into a car presumed driven by Liana, and that's something that could have happened in the book. But more on that theory later. The girl does hand Corso his bag while he examines his cracked glasses, just like the book. However, there are minor tweaks, changes from the source material for either logistic or aesthetic reasons. In the 9th gate, the girl does accept Corso's handkerchief, but earlier at the steps. How she gets her injury differs too. It was accidental by Corso's elbow, not a headbutt from Rochefort as written. There's no not-so-subtle references to fighting angels afterwards. The movie spoke about it once, and that was that.
Oh, I see. You're my guardian angel, then.
If you say so.
At the hotel, Gruber is there, but Corso and the girl stop at his room, not hers. While in both depictions, she does mark his face with red lines. Here is where the book and film diverge. Let's briefly step back into the film. The 9th gate has Corso called away by Balkan's phone call to be taken at the lobby booth, and Corso soon prepares his second visit to Kessler. In the Club Dumas, Corso already has what he wanted from his first visit to the Baroness. Therefore, the book takes a direction that's unique from the film. Instead of a phone call interrupting their conversation, this is where Corso gets the girl in bed, with Reverte using the Battle of Waterloo as an intimate metaphor. What happens afterwards? Corso remembers to open the envelope Gruber had given him. Gruber reveals the hotel Bernie and Liana are staying at, the Hotel Crillon. Corso immediately rushes over and up to room 206. When Bernie opened the door, he found no hostility in Corso's expression. He was barefoot and in pajamas. He just had time to open his mouth before Corso gave him a punch that sent him staggering across the room. "Good morning," he said. He walked to the bed. Liana, motionless, still holding her toast, stared as he sat next to her. Putting the canvas bag on the floor and glancing at the breakfast tray, he poured himself a cup of coffee. For half a minute, nobody said a word. At last, Corso took a sip and smiled at Liana. Corso demands answers to the conspiracy between the Anjou wine and the Book of the 9 Gates. Bernie pushes Corso into the bathroom for a more private conversation. What he hears instead is Bernie's story, how he and Liana came to an understanding to give back the Anjou wine for sentimental reasons. In other words, Bernie just wanted to sleep with Liana. Corso wouldn't listen, however, and he pushed Bernie aside and ran into the bedroom to find Liana out of bed, half-dressed and packing a suitcase. He saw her icy eyes, the eyes of Milady de Winter, and realized that while he was shooting his mouth off like an idiot, she'd been waiting for something, a sound or a signal, waiting like a spider in its web. "Goodbye, Mr. Corso." Rochefort stepped out of the shadows, landed a punch, and knocked Corso out cold. Of course, Bernie was long out of the story this late in the 9th gate. There was no business between him and Liana, or him and Andrew Telfer for that matter. Corso will lose his book to Liana, but that's done at a later time and done off-screen. If you stitch 2 scenes from the film, you can visualize this scene from the book. Corso will go to confront Liana in her Paris hotel before rushing into her bedroom at her chateau. She'll be out of bed, half-dressed, and with a suitcase. And of course, the mustache man will step out of the blue and land a firm punch. And this concludes chapters 9 through 12 in my breakdown of the Club Dumas by Arturo Perez-Reverte. If you enjoyed this video, kindly consider a like, share, or subscribe. You can catch the previous installment here, and the next one too, when it's available. Meanwhile, the machine is going to suggest something that's best for you. This is Mr. G of Synergy saying, thanks for watching.